What up, what up, what up? It is Monday, October 7th, and it is the first day of oral arguments at the Supreme Court of the United States for its new session. SCOTUS resumes after ethical concerns among some justices and after being under fire for several decisions over the past few years. And today on Reported is legal expert Anita Allen, a law professor at the University of Pennsylvania, who specializes in constitutional law, civil rights, and ethics. Anita, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Randy. It's great to chat with you.
Let's start with this context in total. What does this background information say to you about the current court?
I think the court is in trouble. Trouble from the point of view of public opinion. The confidence in the court is definitely faltering because it seems so blatantly political. I think that the court is struggling to find a jurisprudence of privacy, of reproductive rights, of First Amendment values, and other important principles, such as the 14th Amendment principles, that really makes sense in our current environment. And this is causing a lot of controversy, both inside the court and also outside the court.
So let's take both forks in the road here of what may happen to the court if Trump is elected and if Harris is elected. So starting with Harris first, what do you expect to see from the court under her tenure?
Well, as you know, the new president only gets to appoint or recommend new judges, nominate new judges, if a judge steps down. We have life tenure. So it's possible that during the entire presidency of a Kamala Harris, that there would be no opportunity for her to nominate a justice, and so she couldn't have that kind of direct impact on the court. If Trump is elected, the same thing holds. He might not be able to appoint any new justices. There are, however, enough justices in the court who are at or near retirement age, so we could have some openings coming up. And if they do open up, then the question would be, how would the Kamala Harris or Donald Trump seek to fill those seats? I think we know what Donald Trump would do. He would try to further increase the conservative hold, the grip of ideology on the court. And I think that what Kamala Harris would try to do would be to restore some balance on the court by appointing a more diverse, inclusive, and also a more liberal, frankly, court.
Yeah, and the rumblings you were referring to about retirement is Justice Alito and Thomas. And should they step down if Trump is elected, he'll likely, appoint someone who shares those same viewpoints. But what big cases are on the docket for this session that we should be looking out for?
Well, the first Monday in October is always an exciting time for Supreme Court watchers. And this year, there are a couple of issues that are going to be foremost on the agenda. One of them is a case involving transgender rights, and this decision will decide whether or not a state can ban the use of gender affirming surgery and treatments for young people. Very controversial case about a very controversial topic, and we'll have to wait and see how the court comes out. I'm not ready to offer a prediction on that, but it's going to be a very important decision that will affect the lives of many, many transgender youth in America. Another important area is going to be gun control, because this whole issue of whether people can sell these sort of ghost guns that are used in sort of kits to make guns that can then be hard to trace is something which we should be able to strike down. And some states would want to ban those, and some states want to allow them. And the Supreme Court will have to decide whether or not those ghost gun laws can be upheld. And then finally, I think of a great importance is the First Amendment and privacy, which is an area that I am especially interested in. And the issue there is, is it we want to protect young people from inappropriate websites. And we have laws that, in fact, do seek to protect young people, but those laws are not perfect. So the issue in an upcoming case involving free speech is whether or not laws in Texas that will put age restrictions on access to certain websites will also prevent adults from accessing websites, or prevent them from accessing unless they're willing to give up personal information that identifies them. This is a big problem. So I think these three areas, gun control, First Amendment, free speech rights and privacy, and the continuing concerns about transgender rights, are going to be the big issues for the court coming up this term.
There's a few previous decisions I want to ask you about specifically.
Okay.
You're a constitutional law and civil rights expert. It's an election year, and the court ruled last session that a racially gerrymandered congressional map in South Carolina can be used. Can you make sense of that? How is that constitutional?
Well, in order for a particular uh, um, voting map to be established, you just need legislative action, and that action is going to be presumptively valid. So you really have to show some intent to discriminate in order to have the court strike down the measure. And while some of us see intentional efforts to bleach Black people or to marginalize African American or other minority votes, other people see, oh, this is just a legitimate exercise of either political power or of governmental power. So one can look at it in different ways, and I think some people look and see intentional efforts to marginalize and to prevent a Black vote from counting, as we know has happened in the past. Other people see, oh, it may be advantageous to the conservatives, but it's not an abuse of power.
I see. Okay. And similarly, you're also a health law expert. And I think the public was surprised when the court decided to overturn Roe v. Wade, but then approve the FDA being able to install its guidelines of distributing a commonly used abortion pill. Is that
Yeah,
kind of the same as what you just described for the?
I didn't find either of those things surprising. I think that by 2021, it was pretty clear that Trump had stacked the court, and the court was going to strike down Roe versus Wade. We've been holding on for decades, and it was clearly going to be the time when it fell. The other decision also wasn't surprising because think about it: if the Supreme Court had said that individual disgruntled right wing doctors in Texas or some other state could could cause a FDA approved drug to be withdrawn or withheld, that would mean that the entire power of that agency would be gutted. And I didn't think that this Supreme Court was prepared to interfere to that extent in one of our most important federal agencies. I say that, however, at the same time, we've seen in the recent term the court being willing to defang the power, defang some of the federal agencies, and to instead allow legislation or state action to interfere or erode the power of our agencies. So I wasn't surprised by what happened in the FDA case involving the abortion bill, but maybe I should have been a little bit surprised in light of what came later, which was, a decision that really did call into question the ability of the agencies to have power over what happens in the state. And the EPA is an agency under fire right now, and we'll see whether it gets the kind of respect that the FDA seems to have gotten from the court last term.
Okay. And the last previous case I want to ask about before we get back to some of the public perception stuff that we opened with is the presidential immunity, granting it partially. How does that impact the election? And especially if Trump wins, what can we expect to see?
I think we can expect to see an even more um, unhinged a set of behaviors from Trump, because I think he believes he will be protected by the court. He will believe that he can push the envelope. He can cross lines that the rest of us are not allowed to cross. It's an outrageous matter to think that someone, even the president, is above the law. And this decision on the Supreme Court part is going to be one that I don't think will stand the test of time. I think that we will see some pullback from that, because it just simply can't be the case that the president can inspire or encourage an insurrection and that goes unpunished.
Yeah. And I think everything that we're talking about right now is one of the reasons why the voters I spoke to they have a really low confidence in the Supreme Court right now.
Yeah.
What do you think the court can do to win over more public trust?
You know, I think ordinary people often wonder, how can it be that constitutional law changes when the Constitution stays the same?
Right.
And I think the only answer to that question is it can change because politics change, and because our court is not insulated from politics. We have to keep in mind that our Supreme Court is supposed to be objective and neutral, but how can it be perfectly that? Because a political entity, namely the president, a political entity, namely Congress, they're the ones who get people under the court, and they have definitely a political agenda. So there's no possibility we can have a court that's going to be completely neutral. So given that, the judges themselves have a deep ethical responsibility to rise above the politics of the moment and to really think about what is in the best interest of Americans, and not just some Americans, the wealthy ones or the white ones or the men, but also the women and the poor and the disenfranchised and the immigrants and all of us. So we just basically need a more deeply just and ethical court. But it's up to the individual justices to rise above politics. Our system, there's nothing structural to prevent the court from being political. And that's why the law can change when the Constitution stays the same.
Mm. And there's been calls for reform. Your answer is a great segue to asking about that. Expanding the court was tossed around a few years ago. I haven't really heard much about that in recent years. What's your take on court packing and just your general recommendations for reform?
Well, I think first of all, if we use the expression court packing, it sounds like something evil is happening, because that was a term that was used in the 20th century when the court was faced with the possibility of being expanded. But I don't think that the idea of expanding the court itself is an evil idea. But I would just caution the use of the word court packing, because it sounds like it's something wrong. But what I think is right is that we need to have a structure for our Supreme Court that maximizes the possibility that the court will be that sort of deeply just and fair and apolitical body that I was describing earlier, or at least somewhat less political body that I was describing earlier. A lot of countries have many more justices. There are countries that have 18 justices on their Supreme Court. Israel has a bigger court. India has a bigger court. We could have a bigger court. A bigger court per se wouldn't do the trick if we still have a structure in which a president can choose as many justices as vacancies are open during their presidency, and thereby put their stamp so deeply on the court. So I think actually the idea of term limits may be a better idea than expanding the number of justices.
Okay.
Term limits would mean that after 10 years or 15 years or 20 years, a new body of justices could come. And that would benefit the public in a couple of different ways. One, it would give more presidents an opportunity to nominate justices, more Congresses and an opportunity to confirm justices, and would also give the court an opportunity to grow with the nation. When you have so many very elderly people deciding our future, then we're going to be stuck in the past. I think one of the reasons why we have some of these bad decisions is not just because of the politics, but because of the generational shifts in our country, which mean that the justices are out of touch with what society's actual needs are. And I'm not saying that elderly people can't make good decisions, but I'm saying that everybody is going to be to some extent situated in their experience. And we need to have fresh experiences and the experiences of the upcoming generations deciding the future, not people who are 2 or 3 generations behind.
And I think what I learned from voters is they want more of a say in who the justices are. What
Mm.
is the likelihood or even feasibility of having the Supreme Court justices become elected positions?
Well, many of the states have elected judiciaries. In Pennsylvania, where I live, many of our judges on the state level are elected. And then after they've been elected, there's a somewhat simplified process for having them reaffirmed to continue their terms. And it's controversial because an elected judge might not have to be a lawyer, might not
Oh,
have to have any experience with judicial work whatsoever. And so you do have the problem that sometimes elected judiciaries have less legal expertise than those who are appointed. So you could combine election with qualifications, like you have to be a lawyer, you have to have some legal training before you can become a judge. But I would just be cautious about whether or not the judges that were elected were actually highly qualified. Of course, you can learn on the job, but again, I think that we want, this is such important work. We want people who have training in the complex ideas that constitute our common law and our constitutional law and our statutory law on the bench. So I think that term limits, again, would be great, because you could have judges who are vetted for their qualifications, combined with knowing that they don't have life tenure, so they will be more accountable to the public. So
Mm.
that's my take. I guess I'm not so hot on the idea of direct elections for judges, but I'm very interested in seeing the possibilities of a judiciary that was more accountable through term limits and that was fresher and more in touch with the public through term limits.
Okay.
And by the way, there is a way in which the public can have a direct impact on the court, which is by voting in the presidential election. So everybody, please vote in the presidential election because the president is the one who nominates judges to the Supreme Court. And then also, I would say that voting for lawmakers, voting for your congressional representatives, is a good idea too because they have some say so over the confirmation of Supreme Court justices, especially
Yes.
the Congress, the Senate.
The presidential election is November 5th. Vote however you want, in person, early, absentee ballot. Those options are available to you. And you can check your local government websites to, one, register to vote or confirm you're already registered and to find your polling location. Anita, I know most of this conversation focused on the areas improvement of the court, but do you see anything that they're doing well?
Do I see anything that they're doing well? Well, you know, oh, um, hmm. They are maintaining facial civility. I think that's something, at a time when public life is so angry and rude and crude, the court still has maintained a dignified demeanor. And I think that's actually a good thing. And from what I'm hearing, based on my knowledge of the court, they actually do behind closed doors have civil relationships. I actually had the pleasure last year of visiting the Supreme Court, having dinner in the court at the invitation
Wow.
of Justice Gorsuch, and it was a really eye-opening experience. And I did feel the fact that the court's dignity is still intact. But if you have a court that is maintaining internal demeanor while engaging in ethically compromising behavior outside the court in terms of gifts and so forth, power peddling and influence peddling, but also that is coming up with decisions that are so harmful to women's reproductive health, to the rights of African American and other minority students and so forth, then I think we have a court that is not all that we would hope it would be. So I can find a little bit of light and goodness in the court, but I see a lot of areas where the court needs some big improvement.
Anita, thank you. You have been a treasure of insight. Before I let you go, I would be remiss not to ask about the affirmative action decision specifically because you're at Penn, you're on that campus, you know what the vibe is, for lack of a better word. So, I guess what impact have you seen of the affirmative action decision on Black student enrollment and just Black life on campus?
Yes. Well, everybody was very concerned about this decision because it does roll back years of jurisprudence that the Bucky case established affirming affirmative action. So the good news here is that we at Penn Law School have been able to enroll a fantastic first year class that includes many African American students, many students of color. And I am encouraged that despite the inability to use race as a specific category of qualification for law school, that merely having people have the ability to describe their personal experiences in their essays, it has been a way for us to really put together a diverse and interesting and powerful class of brilliant young men and women who are going to do great things for the United States in the future when they become lawyers. So I'm actually not terribly dismayed. However, I think that the experience of one university, especially one elite university, is not going to tell the whole story. We have to wait and see. I think a couple of more years to really tell whether or not the end of affirmative action and the strong sense of affirmative action that the court struck down is going to mean that at historically minority colleges as well as at historically majority colleges and universities, we see a decline in the enrollment of Blacks. I think there's been some concern about Asian enrollment dropping this year. I haven't seen that in my classes, but I've heard it's happening in some context. So we have a lot to be concerned about. We need to be vigilant, keep our eyes open, and hope that we won't be losing out on a whole generation of bright young people because of this really terrible decision.
Okay. Anita Allen, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.